Another Facebook Files bombshell is out. Chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Jim Jordan, revealed on X that he's obtained internal Facebook documents suggesting the Biden administration, alongside foreign activists, attempted to silence Americans like you and me. Jordan took to X Tuesday, writing, quote, Facebook Files Part 5, Biden White House relied on foreign disinfo activists to pressure Facebook to censor Americans. Jordan pointed out how UK-based Center for Countering Digital Hate alleged that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and 11 other people, dubbed the Disinformation Dozen, were culpable for 65% of anti-vaccine content on social media. But Jordan alleges the number was closer to 0.05%.
Despite this wrong information and Facebook's internal admission that the accounts in question were fairly benign, then White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki still continued to cite the wrong figure. Here's a clip.
I think this was a question asked before. There's about 12 people who are producing 65% of anti-vaccine misinformation on social media platforms. All of them remain active on Facebook, despite some even being banned on other platforms, including Facebook, ones that Facebook owns. Third, it's important to take faster action against harmful posts. As you all know, information travels quite quickly on social media platforms. Sometimes it's not accurate, and Facebook needs to move more quickly to remove harmful, violative posts. Posts that will be within their policies for removal often remain up for days. That's too long. The information spreads too quickly. Finally,
in this latest report, we see a lot more of what we've seen previously, I don't know how many dozens of times by now, of the social media companies' internal discussions, this time Facebook, where moderators realize that what the government is asking them to do is not accurate, that the government is relying on claims by a third-party watchdog organization, in this case the Center for Countering Digital Hate, that is making claims that are exaggerated, that are not true, that these specific accounts are responsible for all this disinformation. Earlier today, we talked with Michael Schellenberger about this group and how some of the claims they make are just not true. They've flagged claims that scrutinizing a potential lab leak origin for COVID as an example of misinformation, as a racist conspiracy theory. That gets you included as a disinformer if you've done that in this group's mind, and then they work with the government to pressure the companies to do something. In the the Facebook moderators' discussions, they say, we've adjusted some of our policies, but frankly, the accounts in question are not violating our policies. They know our policies pretty well. They know how to avoid technically violating them. So I don't know what more we can do, and I don't think Mark Zuckerberg is really going to be comfortable, their boss, with doing a lot more, because he does care about free speech. So we see the tremendous pressure the companies were under to censor speech, even when they thought that was not called for and not accurate.
Yeah, I think to say 65% of the misinformation or disinformation about vaccines and COVID-19 was caused by 12 people is absurd, because just
right.
Looking at it from a... Sorry, what was that, Robbie?
No, right. It's just absurd on its face.
Yeah, from a data-driven policymaking perspective, you have to have some theory as to how you arrive at that figure. And you should be pretty sure, if you're going to use that figure publicly, how do you determine if someone who follows RFK Jr. is now posting something about COVID-19 and vaccines simply because they follow RFK Jr.? How do you say that this disinformation or misinformation is spreading and is believed because of this one individual? It's impossible to measure. Facebook responded after Jen Psaki said this, and they said, that the accounts were fairly benign because they removed 18 million pieces of COVID misinformation from their platform that belonged to 2 billion people. So how do you trace those 2 billion people back down to these 12? And that accounts for 65% of the 18 million pieces of misinformation you took down. And Psaki was questioned about this the very next day and just said, we don't really find that sufficient from Facebook. And so for me, if you really cared about misinformation, you'd care a lot more about reaching those 2 billion people. What's the strategy for giving them good information? How do we reach them? You'd care a lot less about these 12 people. But I think RFK Jr. and the like who are anti-establishment are very inconvenient for Jen Psaki and the Democratic establishment. And I really think that's where the focus comes from, more than actually caring about misinformation. And that's why I really don't like it.
Right, and there's just there's no pushback. There's just a unthinking acceptance of what disinformation tracking organizations are telling the government and the media. And this can't go on. There needs to be scrutiny. I'm glad there's scrutiny now from our show, from independent journalists like Michael Schellenberger and Li Fang and Matt Taibbi and other people, who are looking into the claims these organizations are actually making and finding out that the so-called disinformation experts routinely spread misinformation themselves because they're getting basic facts wrong. They're saying. They're expressing opposition to opinions that are sometimes legitimate or many times within the realm of legitimate discourse. Again, we don't know for sure how COVID arose, but it's not crazy or conspiratorial to think it escaped the lab at Wuhan, given everything we've learned. Again, this is a credible accusation. This is the Energy Department and the FBI have concluded this is more likely than the other explanation. Again, it is not definitively established, but it's just simply not misinformation or conspiratorial to make that claim. Yet this very organization pressuring Facebook to change its speech policies had that in mind, and has reached out to advertisers to get them to not appear on sites, many of them conservative or independent or libertarian or contrarian, that feature that claim being made and claims like it. So it really is pernicious. And then the media, just like Jen Psaki, celebrates these organizations and say, oh, here's an expert saying all of this stuff is misinformation. Oftentimes the media is actually making even stronger claims than the watchdog organization or the so-called expert. So it's like misinformation on top of misinformation by people who are trying to warn you about misinformation. So it's so hypocritical and so pernicious, and the effects on our free speech rights on social media are just very vast because the companies felt all of this pressure. And people like Jen Psaki and Joe Biden ended up eventually saying Facebook is killing people because it's not taking this seriously enough, and they implied that their regulatory their liability threshold would be increased if they didn't do more. So, of course, they felt like they had no choice. I mean, if that's not violating the First Amendment, I don't know what is.
Yeah, and when Psaki was asked, what kinds of misinformation is being spread, who are the actors, her response was essentially that people are saying that the mRNA vaccines were untested and therefore risky. And a lot of these posts happened at a time when they had not received FDA approval yet, or they went through a fast-track process so that people could use them when they didn't meet the typical process for vetting a vaccine to be released. And I get that they accelerated the process, but is simply questioning the risk of taking the vaccine really misinformation? Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we have to dig into, because for someone to just question what's going on there, Jen Psaki directly relates it to the FDA when she's asked about this. She says, well, the gold standard of drug approval, the FDA, when everyone knows the FDA is corrupt. So regardless of wherever you stand on the issue, we can all agree that it probably doesn't help someone who's questioning the science to receive the response, well, the FDA approved it, if they already question the efficacy and actually the moral grounding of the FDA when they have so many people on their executive board that have been tied to these large pharmaceutical companies. They've lost the trust of the public. Is the way to gain it back to simply take down posts? I just don't think it's an effective strategy for fighting misinformation. And it's very clearly the strategy that a lot of mainstream Democrats and this administration supports. I just don't think it's going to be effective to win these people back over. And so if we really cared about misinformation, we would maybe be looking into what's effective. And there have been studies done by a group that focuses on misinformation at Harvard, and they find that that really isn't what wins people back over who have been won over by this misinformation, who are questioning vaccines, who are questioning the science around COVID-19. And so if you really cared about it, maybe you'd take a different approach. So I don't think they really care about it. And this was around the same time that, as Michael Schellenberger told us about, the administration was frustrated that they just had Facebook and they just had Twitter working with them to regulate information on the platform. Then we saw the rise in popularity of TikTok, and they immediately tried to find reasons that TikTok needed to be removed entirely as a platform. Why? I think it's because they didn't have as much control over the platform.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll continue following that and stay with us for more Rising right after this.